I need to go away and satisfy my own need to go climbing, to be a better person.
Kenton is an elite Everest guide with 18 summits under his belt.
The mountain doesn't care if you're an expert. The mountain doesn't care if you climbed it 18 times. The mountain doesn't care. The mountain will kill you regardless. You've got to be totally on your game.
Mastering the art of leading teams through both the death zone and life's everyday challenges. In this episode, he shares how high-altitude trials transform moments of hubris into a journey of authentic leadership and self-discovery.
But something which keeps me focused and keeps me sharp and keeps me grounded, which perhaps people don't have in organizations. They don't have the luxury. They don't step over dead bodies. Oh, I got wind. That keeps you in check. That keeps you focused. That keeps you sharp.
All this and more on the Privileged Man podcast.
So welcome to the Privileged Man podcast. If you're tuning in for the first time, then one quick favor from me. Please subscribe to the channel you're listening on. And if you enjoy this conversation, please give us a 5-star rating. It takes seconds, but makes a huge difference to the guests we can attract and quality of production. Now, let's get into it. So, Kenton, welcome to the Privileged Man podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
No, absolute pleasure. Looking forward to this one. We've chatted a little bit before you hit record, and I think this could be really, really fascinating. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for being open to it. Obviously, in the research that I did for this conversation, I've gone and heard you speak on several different platforms, but I think the one thing, just getting straight to the point, is when you're climbing and you're leading clients into what's known as the death zone, how do you feel on the inside? How much responsibility are you taking on the inside, or are you or have you given that responsibility to your clients?
Well, it's diving in at the deep end, aren't we? No, it's really interesting. I mean, I traveled to Nepal with my family about 4 years ago. It's actually during COVID. I busted the family out of COVID and got quite a lot of hate on social media for doing so. But I thought it was really important for everybody's well-being. And I was in Nepal anyway. I was going across there for some work, and during the COVID, probably all remember that if you were working, there were parameters that you could fit into which allowed you to travel. And it was really interesting when the family came across, my wife especially. So she essentially said that my demeanor was quite different to the demeanor that perhaps I have here at home. And what I mean by that is it very much feels like it's my manner. This is my domain. This is where I excel. And that gives me a degree of confidence, which perhaps I don't have here. And with that comes, it's not that I feel bulletproof, because that's borderline arrogant. But I feel, even when we're high on Everest, I feel quite comfortable in the environment. I know that we have a great Sherpa team around us, being led by my trusty friend, Dorji Gelgin. And I know that's about as good as we can possibly put together. I know that the client should be, fingers crossed, both physically and mentally prepared for what we're about to undertake, predominantly because I spent a lot of time with these individuals before we get to Everest. And if my own personal fitness, I'm 51 now, and it does fluctuate a little bit. It's not like being a 30-year-old whippet and you can get away with mayhem and still perform the next day. If my personal fitness is in the right place, then that generates a bedrock for me. That confidence, that trust within myself is elevated even more. So when you put those different elements together, I feel strong on Everest. Not for me personally, but for the collective, the thing that we've put together. I've got to ask a client, and he or she is going to be so far out of their comfort zone, it's quite hard to describe what that's like. But I've got to ask them to step outside of a tent, to don their crampons, to put an oxygen delivery system, and start climbing into darkness. It's going to be windy. It's really scary. There is anxiety for myself and for the for the Sherpa team as well as the client, there's got to be at least a veneer of utter confidence that this is going to be seamless.
Right.
And I think to do that properly, it's got to be more than a veneer. It's got to percolate from inside you, and it's got to come from this years of experience to get you to where you are. And a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, and I think we all suffer it to a degree. I mean, I do. But when it comes to Everest, when it comes to that crunch time, that's got to be put to one side. There's no room for that. The confidence in what we're about to do, the preparation that we've done, the relationships that we've formed, these all come very much to the front, and they've got to be right. So there's a long-winded way of saying that, summit down Everest, I'm normally not within my comfort zone, but I'm operating with parameters, with a safety net that allows me to operate to the very best of my ability to look after those around me, both the client and the Sherpa team, because I'm responsible for all of it. The buck stops with me.
Sure.
And I think that's really, really important to be in that situation. Not every facet of my life is like that, but that particular part is.
So when other people are in the death zone, it's almost like you're in your comfort zone. Is that sort of with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you spend enough time doing whatever it is, especially if it's pushing your envelope, then you grow into that space. I remember once, and this is a horrid confession, and I suspect that Mr. Powers is no longer with us, but he's my maths teacher. I don't think I've ever come public with this. He was my maths teacher at school, and for my A-level mocks, I cheated. And because I was really struggling with maths at the time. So I made a guess what the paper was going to be, and I worked the paper the night before, and it turned out to be I chose the right paper, and they gave us essentially the A level from the year before, which I can't remember where I got it from. But I made this guess, and I worked the paper, and I got a much, much, much better grade than I thought, than anybody thought. It was like this miracle. But that fraudulent miracle gave me confidence, despite the fact it was fraudulent. But it gave me the confidence in what it was that I was doing, maths. And I started to work on that, and I got better and better and better and better. And I went from being predicted an N, which is about as bad as you can get, to I walked out with a B. And in reality, I think it was just pure maths, which is I was really struggling with. I'd probably got like an A+++, or I fluffed a bit that I was actually good at, the mechanics. But what I'm trying to say is that for me, if I spend enough time, everything I do is confidence. I need to constantly build this depth of experience in whatever it is that I'm doing, to give me the mental attributes and mental stability that I require to be able to perform at what it is that I'm doing. And it's the same on Everest. I think if you do it enough times, then you grow into that role. You gain, whether it's fraudulent or not. Whether your peers are looking at you thinking, well, perhaps he or she doesn't belong here. They perhaps don't have the. If you go through that process, or certainly it worked for me. I mean, I rocked up on Everest, 2004. Never been there before. Never been to an 8,000-meter peak. Felt very much like a fish out of water. Luckily, I was kind of mentored that first couple of years when I was working on the mountain. And you start that process. And I know for a fact that some of my peers, well, people that became peers, were looking at me thinking, well, who's this upstart that's turned up on the mountain? They don't belong here. But I pushed on through, and I pushed on through that fraudulent feeling that you perhaps have that you don't belong. Just like the maths, I knew that I had cheated. I kind of knew that I was cheating on Everest, and perhaps was, above my pay grade in the first couple of years. But then you grow into it, and you develop, and you learn the skill set that you require. You learn how to look after clients at 8,000 meters. You learn how to lead a high performing Sherpa team, and then all of a sudden you start molding that Sherpa team into something that's even better because you're gaining that experience. You know where you want to go, and that's what we've done. And I'm very
Yeah.
proud. 21 years later, to have possibly, and maybe I'm punching above my grade pay grade again, possibly the best track record that any Western guide has ever had on that mountain. And it started by being fraudulent.
So, it's well, thank you, Mr. Powers.
Well, yeah,
Then
but he never knew.
it's a
I,
scoop.
I don't think
It's a
anybody
scoop.
knew.
It's a scoop. I've got something new. Um, oh well. Anyway, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, obviously that you say talk about fraudulent, but if you're taking that into, I guess, how you talk about confidence and the importance of confidence. I talk about, why do adults come and present as not being confident? What is it that men particularly, they may hide behind a veneer you have just embodied and said, I am the most successful Everest mountaineer, Western mountaineer. They may say that I am, or identify as a, not identify as, they may say I am the CEO of this, but internally, and I know this because I speak to them a lot, internally, they don't quite believe it. They don't quite have that sense of confidence. This essence that could be stripped away from them at any point, and then they would just be average Tim or average Joe, so to speak. And there isn't this sense of embodied confidence. What would you say to anyone who? How do you build that confidence? That's I guess what I'm. Yeah, that's my question. How do you
Well,
build
I suppose for me, it's repetition. And it's just doing something time and time again. And yeah, I think we should let the audience know that there's been many times that I feel exactly the same. I mean, if you stripped Everest out from my persona, who am I? Well, I'm an average Tim. I'm Bob. I'm an average Kenton. My in my sort of persona is kind of built around that mountain. Now, it's not saying that there wouldn't be something else if if I didn't go down that path, if I didn't embark on that journey, I probably would have taken a footstep in a different direction and persevered at that. I mean, one of the traits that I am very good at is being just diligent and just keep plugging away at it. But I suppose the big thing for me is what's wrong with being an average Tim? There's nothing wrong with being average Tim. Um, and the important thing is, well, I think anyway, is how comfortable are we with being ourselves?
Hmm.
And this is something which I myself struggle with. Certainly, say here in the UK, it's very different. Was I think I mentioned at the start, I got two very different hats. If I step off the plane in Kathmandu, and I'm coming down the steps because you do have to come down steps because there's no air bridge at Kathmandu airport. So you come down the steps. It's as if I've stepped into a different skin. And my wife says this sometimes. You've come down the steps balls first. It's like I am back. This is I'm here. Is that me or is that a projection of an image of me that I want people to love and to prescribe to and to be part of? And I'm not sure because I spend so much time over in the Himalayas. Is this real life here or is that real life there? And the conundrum that I always have is, why can't I bring one back with me? Why can't I be that bulletproof person here in the UK? Because I have the same doubts and worries and fears that everybody does. But I don't seem to have that in Nepal. Um, and maybe it's the ego in me, you know. Well, it was Ryan Halliday. You know, ego is the enemy. You know, Ryan Halliday being the American dude that's big into the Stoics. He
Mm.
wrote the book, you know, Ego is the Enemy. At the same time, I think, you know, we all have an ego to a certain extent, and our ego does need massaging. And mine gets fully massaged out in Nepal because you know, I am recognized. I am very good at what I do there, and you know, whether we think Everest is the pinnacle of mountaineering or not, you know, it's perceived to be that way. And you know, I operate at the very highest level there. But that doesn't mean that I don't have the same self-doubt that your CEO does, and the fear that he or she might have. Well, okay, we're talking about guys here predominantly. You know, if that's stripped away from them, you know, what do they stand for? If Everest is stripped away from me, what do I stand for? Well,
What do
that's
you
something
stand?
I'm working on.
What do you stand for?
Well,
So,
I mean, that's a very pertinent question. I mean, what is my purpose?
yeah.
Um, and I mean, it's something that I've been working on for, well, best part of like 15, 16 years since I moved back from Europe. I used to live in France. I used to live in Chamonix. Um, you know, and Chamonix is you know, the adventure capital of the world. It's full of sponsored climbers and skiers and base jumpers and rock climbers and, you know, you name it, everybody gravitates there. And you really got to fight if you want to be someone there. You know, and I moved back from being someone in Chamonix to, you know, cozy Gloucestershire, and started to really struggle with what I stood for here, because I mean, nobody gave two monkeys that, you know, I can hang off an ice axe for like hours on a, you know, frozen waterfall while screwing an ice screw in, and you know, do these amazing rock climbs and, you know, be recognized. And it meant nothing. And when I first came back, it's like, well, shit. Then what do I stand for? That took quite a while, and I still don't have the answer what I actually stand for. But I took this deliberate decision because I was beating myself up on a daily basis. Open the curtains, look out on the blue sky. I'm like, oh, it should be climbing, and it should be, you know, rah, rah, rah. You know, and you can't in Gloucestershire. There is no climbing in Gloucestershire. And then I just said to myself, you know, I've made this decision. I've made this decision to come back to the UK, to start a family, to be with my wife, and this is where we're going to settle. And it's got good schools and da 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 da. You know, all the very logical reasons why I would be pulled back. But my heart is still saying, but you should be hanging off heights falls. You should be being recognised in the street, and you know, and then I'm doing the school run, and it's like killing me. But I made that decision of, you know, this is a choice that I've made, and I need to live with this. And everything else, you know, I can park that for now, and I can go back to rock climbing, you know, when the children grow up a little bit, and I can go back to, you know, climbing hard ice, you know, a little bit. And actually, does it really matter? Because it matters to me, but I don't need to climb hard to get the satisfaction out of doing it. I used to have to project this image of, oh yeah, well, Casey's out, you know, climbing hard ice, or he's, you know, just climbed this grade of rock, or he's going up Everest for the fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh or eighth time. You know, it doesn't matter. No,
Mm.
it nobody gives two shits really what you're doing. It matters. It should only matter to you. You know,
Yeah.
and then immediately around you, i.e., your family. And then it got to a stage of I'd be leaving to go on these trips, and I made again another conscious decision of, when I close the front door and I'm off on a trip somewhere, an expedition or whatever it is, how does this collectively help the family? Us. Because, you know, it's no longer me, it's us. We are collective.
Mm.
And that may be going away to earn money, because that's how I earn my money, by doing expeditions and guiding people up mountains and stuff like that. Or it could be, I need to go away and satisfy my own need to go climbing or skiing or whatever it is that I need to do to be a better person. Because without being a better person, I'm going to be a pretty ropey father, a really crap husband, and you know, a shitty friend, because I'm unhappy. So that was a profound moment of shut the door. How is this collectively helping us? And that was a real moment. I'm not really answering your question, am I, about what do I stand for? Because I don't really know. I'd like to say, what do I stand for?
Yeah, I say this to men all the time. Don't go beating yourself up. So we're taking a short break to challenge a common misconception. People think privilege means having it all, but does it? Take the Privileged Man's scorecard and find out where you really stand. It's a quick, eye-opening look at your personal, professional, and emotional wealth. You might just be surprised. The link to the scorecard is in the description below. Now back to the conversation. What I'm hearing is that you moved from I to we, and like it's a natural progression for men coming into the family zone, right? And it's a natural progression that we start to look towards our families more than just ourselves. But in that process, and I think you just really eloquently put it, there can be a sense of like losing ourselves. Like, why am I? So why? What are we doing here? It's like, and I love it how you say like you open the windows and you see blue sky. I mean, when was the last time we saw blue sky?
All
Here
right, yeah, yeah.
in the middle of February as this is being recorded. But I totally get that. I was a nomad, lived in 7 different countries, 7 different countries and 4 different continents. I've got travel in my DNA. And as soon as we had kids, it was like, right, okay, where are the roots? How, what roots are we putting down? Where are they going to be? Why? And it's just, but for a man who I think it's really interesting because it's just like for a man who's been to the top of the world several times, a lot of people would be thinking, I guess, is sort of like you may not even have that sort of sense of selflessness. It would take such a single-minded man to do what you've done, but yet you can come and live in Gloucestershire. How much, honestly, how much does that rip away at your soul on a daily basis? Like you've kind of just explained it, but like honestly, how hard does it rip?
Well, it's not helped by social media when you see all your mates, ripping fresh powder in Chamonix and stuff like that, or they're rock climbing in Cape Town. It's like, why did I choose the UK? Why did I choose Gloucestershire, which is really flat? Yeah, I mean, there are days, like today, I've been out for a run through muddy fields, and you couldn't really run because it was so bloody muddy, and you question some of the choices that you make.
Does that come back for you? Does your wife feel that? Does your
Oh yeah,
do your children feel that? Do they want you to be?
I think the children feel it less. I mean, I have the most supportive, amazing, understanding, empathetic anchor of a wife, who happens to be like an executive coach. So she's really good at just picking up on the signs and the feelings and understanding what makes individuals, including me, a third child, tick. Um, and that really helps hugely because there are definitely days, times. I mean, I remember it was New Year a number of years ago, I don't know, 10 years ago. So we had a New Year's Eve party, and I'm going through one of the wobbles that I was going through of like, oh my god, we're in Gloucestershire, and it was. I think we woke up in the morning, I was stonking hangovers, and she just said, "I don't care what you do, just book a ticket anywhere and just go and do whatever you need to do." And then when you've done it, come back, but don't come back until whatever it is sated. Because she could feel the angst and the anxiety just building up, building up, building up. The children, I think, is slightly different. I mean, they're 14 and 12. I mean, my daughter is very much in the mold of my wife, so she's very attuned to things, very empathetic, and perhaps picks up on things. And I'm a really shallow person in so much that I'm going ice climbing this weekend with a client. We're going to Italy. It's going to be fantastic, and perhaps I'm not going to climb the grade that I would if I was out with friends. but that's enough for me. That satisfies the rat inside me, which is constantly gnawing away, that constantly needs to be fed. Otherwise, start going stir crazy and things like that. So I am really lucky that I can get that satisfaction from simply being in the hills, whatever it is. Yet at the same time, Instagram or whatever it is, terrible platform for, well, certainly for me, in terms of, I have a love-hate relationship with it. You see the blue sky in Chamonix or Zermatt or whatever it is where your mates are and they're climbing nights, they're skiing, they're base jumping or whatever, you're like, oh. But then you just got to, look around you and be grateful for what we have. I mean, deliberately chose this path. We got a really nice house in the Cotswolds. The children go to good schools. They're growing up to be well-rounded human beings and beautiful wife. And this is the path that I've chosen. And would I want to reverse the clock and be a climbing bum again or a ski bum? No, been there, done that. That chapter of my life is gone. And I just need to remind myself from time to time that that chapter is gone. And this is the current chapter. And what the next chapter is, well, who knows really right now? We'll perhaps understand that a little bit more in a few years. And when the children perhaps grow up a bit and leave the nest, and then that will probably be the next chapter. So it's understanding that I don't want to go back to hanging on North Faces thinking I'm going to die at the very next second and spending 8 weeks in deepest, darkest Pakistan, up to my neck in fear and anxiety. Yes, I still go to these places, but I go to it using a slightly different methodology.
Yeah.
I don't want to go revisit a 30-year-old Kenton, put it that way.
Because that guy's gone, right? And that's the yearning that so many men have, is to find that youth again, rather than what you just explained, which is just to have that presence. And it's really very difficult when, as you talk about the social media, comparison is the thief of joy. And
Isn't it just?
isn't it? And Instagram, and I feel that social media really, I mean, that saying in itself is really summing up. I sense, particularly for the young, but even for us, if we're feeling it, how do the kids really feel when they see their friends or these influencers doing things that they can't do or are not able to do on a daily basis? They're just in a different place. They're not in a state of that presence. And so I come back to a question that we were discussing with our men in the Monumental Network this week. And the question was, do you lead with power or presence? And what I'm hearing you say in the third person, you're like, Kenton's like a different guy when you get to the Himalayas, and you're a different person when you come back here. But do you see the difference in the way in which you lead, whether it's through power or presence?
Well, I like to say it's presence. I mean, obviously on something like Everest, being a guide, for instance, I talk about this quite a lot, about how there is a subtle shift in the sort of decision-making process, and it shifts from being like this beautiful democracy, and I bring the Sherpa team in, and I bring the client in decision-making, and we're looking at weather forecasts and satellite images and the logistical plan, and we come up with an overriding way that we're going to execute the expedition. But then as we perhaps gain height on the mountain, then there is a subtle change when it goes from like a very democratic sort of decision-making process to a much more autocratic. Like, I will still bring in Dorji into my decision-making process and thoughts, and I will bounce ideas off him and vice versa. But the client definitely has less of a impactful dialogue into that decision making. Predominantly because the client is now out of their comfort zones and they've never experienced anything like this before. So there's not actually much they're going to be able to add beyond how they are physically and mentally performing, which needs to be taken into account into that decision making process. I mean, when you say so, do you lead by power? I mean, also then, so I dive a lot into military history, and obviously there's a lot of rhetoric on who are great leaders. It's been my interest is predominantly sort of Second World War, a little bit of Korean War, and things like that. And there's an awful lot of material out there. Who were good generals, who were poor generals. Who were you know, and when you think about sort of leading through power, even just describing that term, just in me sort of brings up all the negatives in leadership.
Mm.
I immediately start to think, of the likes of Stalin or Hitler or Erich van der Bach, who was behind the Warsaw, clutching a Warsaw, or so even some of the Allied commanders who perhaps were a lot more autocratic in what they were doing, rather than some of the commanders and leaders who perhaps they had a terrible task to do, but were perhaps a lot more empathetic to how they approached it. A lot more understanding about those around them,
Mm.
i.e., those who they are, their own troops, and we spend time with them, and encourage and build relationships. So, sort of leading by power, immediately puts a degree of fear into me because it just describes a form of leadership that perhaps I'm not that familiar with.
Sure.
Um, that said, I mean, if you're high on Everest and something, God forbid, starts going wrong, then I suppose I step into that situation with a degree of
Assertiveness.
certainty. I was going to say, with full, forthright views, and this is what we need to do, and this is when we need to do it by, and this is why.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily say that's leading with power. I spent a lot of time with Ranulph Fiennes.
Yeah.
He was lucky enough to have me as his mountain guide, and it was fascinating chatting to him about styles of leadership. If the audience don't know, Ranulph Fiennes, was described as the world's greatest, explorer. And, he was in the military. He's, what now, 74, 75, something like 76 even. And his style of leadership was so vastly different to what I considered leadership. It's not to say that his was better or worse, it was just different. But it was not something which, wasn't a leadership style that I would necessarily subscribe to or necessarily understood, because his was very much autocratic, lead by power. There's
Mm.
one leader, and whatever the leader decides to do, that is what you do. And it's worked for Ran. But there are numerous examples throughout history of leading by power. And we go back to the Second World War. I mean, look at Hitler, for instance. Fear, led by fear, let alone power. He elevated it, and nobody would step in and say to him, "Well, actually, Führer, I think you're wrong." There's only a handful of generals that could even approach him and have any form of negotiation. So, from my perspective, it's got to be leadership in in the present.
Yeah.
You've got to be open for people to be able to say, well, have you thought about this, or what about that, or I understand where you're coming from, Kenton, but I'm looking at this weather system in a slightly different way, and this is what I think.
I think the sense of it was interesting, again, the discussion around power and presence and what that actually meant to each man individually. And I mean, essentially, it all came down to raising our leadership game is raising our emotional intelligence game and being open to listening. And that's not as men, as
Yeah, we're
many of
not very
our
good. I mean, I've read quite a lot of some of the writing of the Dalai Lama, and I'm sure he's not the first person to say it, and he won't be the last person to say it. You never learn anything from talking. You just need to be quiet sometimes and listen.
Mm.
And that's really true. And I'm guilty, as guilty as anybody. I love the sound of my own voice, and then sometimes I have to, subconsciously tell myself, just shut up, just be quiet, and let everybody else have their say, and then sort of go away and chew on that, rather than sort of just jumping with 2 feet, which I'm I'm really bad at talking over people and stuff like that, and I know I am, and it's something I'm trying to work on.
Well, enthusiastic, but I mean, in the sense of that again, that the old proverb about having two ears and one mouth. Do twice as much listening as you do talking. When someone told me that, I can't remember how long ago, it definitely did ring a few bells. Just coming back to that sense of Hitler didn't have many people around him, and ultimately hit the fear. People didn't believe in it anymore. They were just they let it go, and he didn't take the right decisions because he wouldn't listen. Who actually tells you, actually, Kenton, you're getting too big for your boots here? You just said you like the sound of your own voice. Like, who actually do you surround yourself with to check in and to keep you sort of accountable to growing?
The lovely Jazz in the house is pretty good at doing that. She keeps me grounded. I had a piece in the Sunday Times magazine back in the summer, and for the first time, let's just rewind the clock a little bit. I came back from Everest, last year, and I just, 18th summit I've successfully guided. I'm number 10 on the all-time summiteer list. I'm like, I don't know, 3 or 4 summits ahead of the nearest Westerner. All of those 18 summits have been led. I'm bringing the teams together. I'm building the teams. I'm executing the whole expedition, and da 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 da. And I was explaining all this to Jazz over a glass of wine one night, and rather arrogantly, I said, "Yeah, I don't think there's anybody else on the mountain that has achieved what I achieved." And that's, even, people like Kami Rita, and he's on 30 summits. He is a Sherpa guide. But I went on to say, but he doesn't necessarily build the teams and bring it together and find the clients and everything else. I mean, there's so many different levels
Yeah,
that we put into place in what we do. And I rather arrogantly said, I think this cements me as number one. And I told this story to a journalist who then printed a abridged version in the Sunday Times magazine. And an individual that perhaps mentored me, he's quite a colourful character, sent me a message saying something along the lines of, hubris is, they have no place in the mountains and things like this. And it, it really hit me. And it's like, well, what does it mean? So I kind of thought about it. I just let it sit, and I thought about it for a little bit. And then I replied to him. And the return was something along the lines of the arrogance that comes through in the article is not going to sit very well with some of our friends. And this particular individual, he's very good at speaking in riddles, and you really have to kind of unpick the riddles and things like this. But he is, for better or for worse, somebody that I do hold in high esteem, and that was a real leveler. That really pulled me down. And although whenever you speak to a journalist, you're never quite sure that they're going to write what you mean. And I think perhaps I was taken out of context a little bit, but it did make me wonder whether perhaps I was overinflating my own level of importance. And it happened once before as well with another guy that I really looked up to, Russell Price, and he was actually trying to get me to work for him on the north side of Everest. I already had a name for myself on the south side of Everest, and he was saying, we're at a drinks party, and he was saying, "Oh, why don't you come and work on the north side? Come into China and work for me and blah 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 blah." And I said, "No, Russ, I like the south side. I like working with my Sherpa crew, and besides, I have the mountain wired." And when a climber says wired, he or she means they fully understand it. They fully understand all the nuances, and it's, if if you have a rock climb wired, it means you can basically climb it in your sleep because you practice it so much. There's no unknowns. It's just a given. And I use this term in front of Russell. I had the South Side wired, and all of a sudden, I mean, Russell was always known for his explosive nature, but all of a sudden, he slams this beer bottle down, and he comes right into my face. He goes, "Don't you ever say that! Don't you ever think that! The moment you think that, the mountain is going to turn around and it's going to kill you. Don't ever think that." And the place was quiet. Everybody's looking at us, and I feel about this big. I feel really embarrassed. I don't quite know what's going on. There's this guy I really look up to, and he's basically screaming at me. But it was a real moment of education
Mm.
that you've got to totally be on your game all the time, because the mountain doesn't care if you're an expert. The mountain doesn't care if you climbed it 18 times. The mountain doesn't care if you're Kenton Cool or or average Tim. The mountain will kill you regardless. Um, and you've totally got to be on your toes the whole time. You can't let your guard down, no matter how confident you are, no matter how many times you've been there, no matter how comfortable you feel in that environment. You've got to be totally on your game.
Yeah.
So that leveled me again for many, many years. I mean, I hate being embarrassed. I hate being the center of attention. I'm incredibly shy. So for everybody to stop what they're doing and look at, I mean, that was like a stake in my heart, man. Like, oh my God, I think I left like within 10 minutes of that. Oh my God, I want to get out of here. Um, but that really grounded me. And the other thing that really grounds me on a regular basis, and I go into organizations and do my talks about risk management and 5 pillars of high performance, but something which keeps me focused and keeps me sharp and keeps me grounded, which perhaps people don't have in organizations that don't have the luxury. And people perhaps will scratch their heads after I say what the luxury is. They don't step over dead bodies.
Mm.
Oh, I got a win. Oh, sorry about that. And that
No.
keeps you really focused.
Mm.
Sorry, Pete. It's been quite an emotional few days, isn't it? I hate it when I do this. And that and totally keep the ego in check. If there's anything that's going to level you, it's stepping over somebody who is a father or mother or husband or whatever it is, and that really, really, God, dear, not shed a tear in a podcast for a while. Um, and Yeah, that keeps you in check. That keeps you focused. That keeps you sharp. And I think that's a really important thing that, we talked about confidence earlier, didn't we? And that fraudulent confidence. Well, you just got to be careful that confidence doesn't mean that you overstep the mark.
Mm.
If you overstep the mark, certainly on big mountains, then you end up being one of those people that doesn't come home.
Yeah, just welcoming in those tears. Just, and thank you for being vulnerable enough to be here, like really present and in that moment. I just would really like to understand what vision you have when you're talking about stepping over bodies. Like what was that visual that really triggered you just then?
Well, it's really interesting because in the moment when you actually step past or over, and I've had really unsavory experiences on the mountain where I've pulled shepherds or fixed lines when they've been hit by rocks and half their head falls off. But that's quite a big in the moment. It's not meaningless, obviously, but when you're on Everest, you're there doing a job, and you're there to look after somebody, and it's certainly not matter of fact. Um, but I'm very good at compartmentalizing stuff, which is one of the reasons why I end up being really vulnerable when I come back home, because I guess stuff things like most men do, stuff things into a closet and hope that at some stage that closet never opens. But the visualization I had, and the really interesting thing is, I could feel that welling up. because I knew that perhaps I was going to bring this up, as we were talking about other things that things that keep you grounded. And I was thinking, oh, yeah, perhaps I should mention bodies and things. And I suppose my visualization of it is I visualize myself there, um, which is all well and good. But then I visualize about what potentially is happening back home while I'm on the mountain or left on the mountain, i.e., I've died on the mountain. Now, how does that transpire to Jazz telling the children? How does that transpire to, the friend network around? Will they come in and support? Well, I mean, I think they obviously would, but how do the children cope? How do the children take that back to school with them? Um, how does that unfold? So, in the moment when I'm present on the mountain and you move around a body, or you move a body off the fixed lines, or whatever it is that you're doing, or you're involved in a rescue and you're bringing a body back down. I mean, that's one thing, and that is a almost like a transactional relationship that you have, or I have, in the moment, because we've got other tasks to do and we can't put too much bandwidth into being too emotional in the moment. But then when I come back home and I've not processed what I've actually done, that's when it manifests itself. And my visualization becomes much more personal to me, to us, the family. And that's where the emotion starts to rise up from. A friend of mine was involved, in a terrible RTA 10 days ago. So he's out in hospital and done. And again, I try to put myself into maybe his position a little bit, but more than that, the family position of, okay, well, how would my family cope with it? How would so Willoughby and Saffron and Jazz cope with it?
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think it's a particularly healthy coping mechanism, but it certainly helps on the mountain in keeping me very attuned to the fact that even with modern technology and modern weather forecasting and the greater degree of knowledge that we have and a fantastic Sherpa team and everything else, you can still die on Everest very,
Mm.
very easily through almost no fault of your own. And that is, that's going to keep anybody's ego, I would like to think, in check. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's not strictly true, because you see people on that mountain that have egos the size of small planets, and you're just looking at these people thinking, "Oh my god!" But but they're different than me, and they're going to deal with that in a different way, and that's perfectly fine. But this is what works for me as an individual.
When people have died in Everest, and you talk about stepping over the body. Sorry to come back to this point, but it's like, do you know who you're meeting up there? Like, have all the bodies been taken down? As far as I understand it, they haven't.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, I've chatted to Jazz about it. What would happen to my body if I was to pass away on a mountain? And I've always said, well, quite like a resting place with a good view, and looking out and being in the mountains that I love and adore, and I don't have too many issues with being there. And I was rather shocked by Jazz's reply when she said, "Well, yeah, I understand that, but you're not the one left behind.
Yeah.
So maybe you don't have a say in it." It's like, ooh, okay, well, I hadn't really thought about it that way. But the issue with bringing bodies down from, say, 8,000 meters is, it's incredibly hard work and incredibly dangerous. And it's becoming more and more of a thing. And, I understand it. I get where it's coming from. Families want closure. But to ask a 8-man Sherpa team to go up into the death zone to retrieve a body doesn't necessarily sit very well with me. You would hope that Sherpa team would do a body extraction and do it seamlessly and nobody gets hurt. Yeah, and they get paid quite handsomely for it, but it might not go well, and somebody might get hurt. And the first rule of first aid is don't put yourself in danger. It's not first aid, obviously, because the person's dead. but somebody's putting themselves in danger to bring a body out. And that just doesn't sit that well with me. So there are numerous bodies on Everest. Luckily, on the south side, a lot of them, year on year, are, some are covered up depending on snow levels. But you don't see all the bodies.
But you see some.
You see some, and there's a really obvious one just at the bottom of the Hillary Step at the moment, an American climber called Don, and you literally got to step over him. You virtually step on his head. Yeah, and that really shocked my client. I made a mistake a couple of years ago with a client, Rebecca, and there was so much going on. I forgot to prime her that we're going to come across Don. And it, really freaked her out. She'd never seen a body before, and we're high in the death zone. We're just down from the summit, and she's so far out of her comfort zone. And then there's a body, and she's like, "Oh my Jesus Christ!" I made a mistake. I should have prepped her, but there's so much going on. It sort of slipped my mind. Predominantly because once again, this is my comfort zone. I can deal with that in the moment on Everest because I use this thing I call binary thinking. And I keep things very, very simple. It's black and white. It's a body. It's as simple as that. And that person's spirit has left. It's an empty shell, and that's how I deal with it. Well, certainly in the case of Don, and he'll probably be there this year. I'm surprised that no one's unclipped him and not necessarily pushed him off, but he'd probably get blown off or something. But there's other bodies, there's people that I know that are there. You don't see them every year. More often than not, they're sort of taken off to one side, so they're slightly off the track. And even when you see them, you don't necessarily point them out to your clients. It's dark, and you're in your little ball of light from your head torch, and you're not necessarily looking around. And I certainly don't look for bodies, but there's one high on Nupsi, literally just down from the summit. I think it's a Hungarian guy, and again, you've got to step over him. We passed the bodies on K2 of Sapadi and JP, and again, I knew they were there, but it was still a bit of a shock when you come around a corner and you literally put your foot between an outstretched hand. Your foot goes between the arm and the shoulder to move past them. I mean, their bodies have been removed now as well. Not all the way down, but part way down. So there are bodies there. No, it's one of those things. It's
Can you feel just how extraordinary what you've just described is, like, and just the average Tim, as we're calling him, we can call him Average Pete.
Yeah.
Just how extraordinary.
To be unfair, I know some fantastic Tims.
Yeah, it's some great Tims out there. Sorry, Tims, but just how extraordinary. Can you connect with what you're saying and just how extraordinary it is, like, and how only a very small minority. You talked about the difference in life of being elite, of what you have, bringing it back to what you were talking about earlier. Like, that is a differentiator. I mean, that is an extraordinary differentiator.
I mean, I think what I do is perhaps no different than, I work in the service industry. I just happen to be very good at working in the service industry, and I lead teams professionally, and I lead, I give clients amazing service, and there'd be a myriad of people that are listening to this that do exactly the same thing and possibly do it even better than I do. Is the only difference is that it's super important, whereby failure in what I do has a very different connotation, depending how bad the failure is. And I've always been very conscious of that. So you build in a defense mechanism to deal with it. In exactly the same way that, forgive me, I don't know much about banking and finance and stuff like that, but I'm sure if you're a trader and you're watching the markets like crash, you've probably seen it before. You've probably dealt with it before. You have defense mechanisms to help you deal with it. And there's some glaring occasions when people don't have those defense mechanisms, and you hear people top themselves or whatever it is because the markets have crashed and they just lost like something being for the company or whatever. but that ability to deal with it comes from years and years and years of being in that environment. I'm not saying my defense mechanism is very good, but if my defense mechanism, like I mentioned, is like for fire up into a wardrobe and lock the wardrobe and hope to Christ it never opens. And every now and then, like we saw 10, 15 minutes ago, a crack appears. And you get a tsunami of unfiltered emotion to wash over you. So you scramble to try to close the door once again. You're saying, "Oh Christ, yeah, that was really unwanted. Don't worry, just get rid of that." But that's not dealing with it.
Yeah.
So it's been uh, a journey that I'm trying to embark on a little bit more to deal with it in a more sustainable way, rather than just bottling it up in my wardrobe. Christ, it never opens up. Um,
And who's there to how do you process this back in the UK? Did you go to therapy? Do you have
Yeah, I mean, not as much as I should. I mean, there's somebody local that I see from time to time. I've got a very, very supportive wife, as I mentioned, she's an exec coach. So, she's not a therapist as such, but she's very good at, showing the empathy and asking the right questions and stuff like that. But that can be a little bit close to home sometimes.
Mm.
I don't necessarily have a particularly good friend network for offloading in that manner, partly because of my transient life. I work a lot in isolation. I've got one or two clients that I'm very close to, and moments intense and things like that. We have very open conversations, but it's one of those things as I get older. I have the ability to be more honest with my feelings and my thoughts, and if I think the moment is right, and sometimes these moments come up when you least expect it. I can give you an example of we were doing a film job in the Everest region, and we were coming down, having done an amazing live broadcast from Kalapatar, 5,600 meters. Or no, is it quite as high as that? Yeah, 5,600 meters. Yeah, and we'd done a live broadcast of this iFit workout. And we're coming down. I was coming down with the with sound girl, and we're just chatting away, just the two of us. And it was like, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the morning because we had to do it to fit with US time. So we're coming down, and and it's really hard job. And it's like COVID time, it brought us all together, and it was really hard. And everybody's tired, and everybody's exhausted, and everybody's vulnerable. And that is a time I think sometimes where we're sharing in a non-judgmental way. I mean, nobody's looking for advice necessarily. They're certainly not looking for judgment. And I was just coming down with I think she was called Alice. We're coming down with Alice, and we're just talking about something, and we just connected. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we both went through this amazing share. I learned so much about her and her own issues and therapy that she was going through, and I had no idea, and we just formed this almost like a mini network. You perhaps could call it, or this little
awesome?
yeah, and it was just amazing. And these come at the times that when you least expect it sometimes.
Mm,
And I think what's really important is when they do come our way, we just need to have an understanding that it's okay.
mhm.
And we should embrace these opportunities rather than shun away from them. Because if it's the right person, there's going to be no judgment. Nobody's going to think any less of you or any more of you for being very open and honest.
Beautiful.
And that's something I'm only really getting my head around in the last 4, 5, 6 years or so. So
Yeah.
there is a constant journey, as you know, and it's a journey that doesn't have a destination. You're going to be on that path, all our lives. And I had a really interesting chat to client only Monday morning. I met a new client, and we immediately go up and we hit it off straight away. We immediately go up and candid, and we're talking about, what is this thing we call life? And it's just a snapshot of something bigger. And this is getting a bit existential now, but it's a snapshot of something bigger. So, the 80 years that we have here, you know, we have to make it meaningful. And if we hold things within us, and I'm really bad for doing this, holding emotion, holding thoughts, holding secrets sometimes, things that, rack me with guilt or shame, by holding those within us, we don't get to live the free life that we should be living because we're only here for a very short period of time. And I'm sure there's probably some individuals out there listening to this who are, religiously minded, and forgive me, I'm not. I don't necessarily think that we get a second chance. So we got to make use of time that we have.
Yeah, really beautifully put. And so who cares really what people think, when it comes to being open and honest and vulnerable and truthful. I mean, where are you taking those secrets? There's very little point in holding on to them. Otherwise it's just literally depressing.
And it manifests itself depending on what the secrets are, with guilt and shame. And then that just, compounds and gets, more and more. So you hold those secrets or push those secrets even deeper. And, as we said, it doesn't let you or allow you to have that free life. Maybe we should.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's where safe spaces like therapy and stuff like that can really help.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's I mean, people who've listened to the podcast before have heard me talk about Monumental, which was the network that I founded. And people talk about safe spaces. And some men will go, oh, literally go, what are you talking about? But it's a space exactly as you just described it, with no shame, no guilt, no judgment, and just doing a lot of listening and a bit of talking and just hearing the wisdom shine through. And it's so powerful.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's not for everybody because everybody's on their own journey and everybody is on their own part of that journey. And if you ask me, the 30-year-old Kenton that we mentioned before that was ripping it around the Alps and was just in it for me, I would have been one of those people who say, are you kidding me? You have to go and see somebody to like offload your worries and your anxieties and your secret. No, but it wasn't for me, or I didn't think it was for me back then. But then, maybe as you get older, maybe you can't hold those secrets anymore, or maybe it becomes too much, or maybe the door is opened by a loved one. In my case, Jazz, and she might say, "Yeah, maybe you just need to talk this through with somebody, or maybe you need to be more open, or maybe you need to have a dialogue with somebody, and it may work for you, it may not work for you, but what it is that you're doing right now isn't working. So why wouldn't we try something else?" And it's not going to be for everybody, now, and there of course there's going to be naysayers because, as I said, they're on a different journey. They're on their journey.
You're totally right about timing. Everyone's on a different time, on a different fuse or length of fuse. But I think particularly when men get into their 40s and 50s and start to become a bit more reflective, I don't say it's depression, but it literally those kind of secrets can literally be pressing down on our shoulders, right?
Oh, hugely.
Anyway, look, Kenton, I've taken up loads of your time.
Yeah, I mean, it's all. I mean, it's been fascinating. It really has, and I think we've only just sort of scratched the surface, in many ways. And it's interesting. Even just articulating helps. It really does. I mean, it'd be fascinating to hear what some of the audience think, or some of your network, in terms of just having the ability to express doubts or fears or anxiety or self-doubt, even just by doing so, I think help bolster.
100%. I just almost said one of my questions, which was percolating for me, is whether you lead by motivation or inspiration. And I can see it's also a sort of interpretation on the power and presence question as well. But the motivation sort of drips off you in terms of what you've done. But the inspiration for me is seeing the way in which you are open, and even like a warrior of a man who's been up Everest 18 times can come and shed a tear and actually say, things are, I have the same fears and doubts and worries as the everyday man, because it's not always perceived like that. After all, we are just humans, human beings, you know, each one of us. As you say, we've done different things. You've chosen Everest. Other people have chosen different paths, but essentially, we're made up of the same cells.
Well, we are, and I think the interesting thing is, and we often think that we are unique, but we think we are quite often that we're unique in the battles that we are facing, our own internal battles. But generally, many people are going through very similar battles, and for me, that was quite a profound moment of learning to realize that actually, the issues that I perhaps harbor are not necessarily that much different than many other people. And once you
Mm.
get your head around that, then part of that shame and guilt that comes with secrets, which you think, oh, I'm the only one, and I can't show weakness because nobody will understand. Well, actually, so many people do understand
Yeah.
because they've been through something similar. It's not going to be the same, because we are unique and different, as you say,
Mm.
but ultimately we are human beings, and there's going to be similar, and that's where you can find sort of support. That's where people are
Yeah.
very happy more often than not to step in and say, hey mate, you know, I kind of understand what you're going through or what's going on, and that only comes from having these sorts of conversations.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. Beautiful stuff.
pretty cool.
Beautiful stuff. Thank you so much for sharing everything, and I look forward to chapter 2 someday.
No, absolutely, and it's quite nice to actually jump on a pod for a change and not talk about the nuances of climbing Everest. No, that was beautiful. I really enjoyed that, Pete. I really did. That was, I think what you're doing is really, it's got gravitas to it, which is really important.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So, thank you for listening to the Privileged Man podcast. If you've built the career, the family, the lifestyle, but feel something still missing, have a look at the private network for male leaders I founded called Monumental. If you're ready to grow with like minded men, check out the links in the description.